Hey guys, I'm Angela and welcome back to Hobby Night. This week I wanted to do something a little bit different and go into Warcry and go ahead and paint one of the Shrike Talon from the Corvus Cabal set that came out some time ago, because I think it's been a little while, but I've had it for a while and I've really been wanting to paint feathers. So I thought, you know what? He's a bird boy and I want to paint feathers. This is happening. And I also really wanted to sort of get into this like winter vibe, so I have some ideas for this guy. I hope you guys are excited. Let's go ahead and paint this bird boy up. The base paints I used were Greyseer and Leadbelcher. The contrast paints were Black Templar, Leviadon Blue, Guilliman Flesh, Basilicanum Grey, Skeleton Horde, Wyldwood. I used the layer paints Fenrisian Grey and Ulthuan Grey. The dry paints Necron Compound and Longbeard Grey. And finally, Reikland Fleshshade. As well as the technical paint Astrogranite. So to start, I went ahead and primed the mini in Greyseer, and we're going to begin, I think, with the flesh tone. My reasoning for this is because it is the most recessed part of the miniature, and I want to make sure that I get that first because I don't want to get that paint on other things. And I'm also really not concerned about any spillage, basically, or overpainting of this color, because I'm using Guilliman's Flesh. It's very pale, and my entire rest of my color scheme for this miniature is intended to be very dark and not muted, because it's definitely not a muted color scheme, but it's definitely darker. So the flesh is actually designed to be the palest thing here, and I'm not really worried about having to like cover anything up with these darker colors later. So if I get this paint other places, really not concerned. And honestly, this portion goes really smoothly. I really like Guilliman's Flesh. It works really well as just a pale flesh tone, and that's kind of what I was going for here. So I used it, did 2 thin coats, and it was good. Now it's time to move on to Black Templar. For this, we're going to be painting all of the feathers because he's a crow, or at least that's kind of how I view him, and I really just wanted to go with that sort of classic black feathered crow look. We're going to be doing some stuff to the feathers a little bit later to enhance them a bit and add a little bit more depth back to them. But the other thing that I wanted to call out that I do here for the Black Templar is I actually go ahead and paint over all of the parts that I'm also going to be painting in metallic later on. It's something that I've started doing a lot recently to try to help get metallic paints just onto my figures a little bit better, and by base coating them in a darker color, the metallic shines through, I don't have to layer it as much, and it works really well. And the contrast paint works exceptionally for this. When I get to the metallics later on, it goes on smoothly and I have no problems. So I'm very pleased with this step. And honestly, the black part was the largest section of him, so he feels immediately almost completely finished, at least in regards to all the base coating, which is fantastic. So when I began this mini, when I was thinking about what I was going to be doing for him, I had a concept in mind, and that concept was midnight. So for the next color for his cloth, to sort of draw that in and really work well with our black tone, I'm going for a really deep blue, and I chose Leviadon Blue just because I thought, honestly, it was something that I sort of chose on the spot while I was painting and just before I was actually going to put this paint on. And I thought it worked really well. It was a really deep blue, so it was a very saturated, like you still get a very vivid blue color tone out of it, but it's very dark in coloring, and so it really went with that sort of midnight vibe that I was wanting to go for. And I think it works really well with the feathers, because often if you see crows or ravens and everything, they have sort of this reflective bluish tint to them, and I think that works really well here to sort of emphasize and go with that color and theming. So it's really nice and I really am enjoying it.
Angela! What is all this?
I might have a problem. I have too many minis to paint, and not enough subscribers to encourage me to do it, so don't forget to subscribe, like, and share the videos. There is one section of the blue, though, that I am definitively going to wait until later to do, and that is the threads that are holding the bones of the bird bones that are sort of connected to his like side piece or whatever. And I want to wait to do that because I am a little nervous about being clean with it, and I figured I would want to paint the skeleton color first, so we're going to skip that for now and we'll come back to it a little bit later. Because I have been going so far with a very dark, very cool, muted tone, I wanted to stick with that when it came to the wood coloring that I was going to be painting onto his very tall shoes. So for that, we're going to stick with Wyldwood. It's sort of my go-to neutral brown tone at this point. It just works really well. It's a really nice, deep, rich brown that you can either highlight with some warm tones or some cool tones to just sort of change its color palette, which I really, really like here. I'm not going to do that on this because there's so little of it, but it works very nicely for just that muted brown subtle color, so it doesn't add too much warmth back into the miniature, because I really want the only warmth on the mini to be his flesh and the skulls later on. Next up, it is time to move on to putting Leadbelcher on all of those metallic pieces that we painted in black before, which again, I'm just really glad that I did that. It made the painting process for putting the Leadbelcher on so much smoother, and it goes really, really quickly. There's not a whole lot. It's mostly just the spikes on his hands. There's some like spikes in the wooden shoes that he's got on, and of course the claws and stuff off of that. So we're gonna get all of that touched up and then move on to the next color, which is going to be Ulthuan Grey. Now I have basically all of my base tones down for this miniature, and I'm very pleased with where it's going. And next up, we're gonna focus on the details. And for this particular paint, originally, I was intending the Ulthuan Grey to actually be a base coat, essentially, for a darker blue tone. I was going to dry brush over top of the feathers to really go with that blue hue thing that I was talking about earlier in the video that crows have on their feathers. But I changed my mind because I decided to do something a little bit different with the cloak, and I really, really liked the very subtle gray hue that this gave his feathers, and it kind of had a moonlight feel to me. So I really just went with it and sort of changed my plan, but I really like where I end up with, so let's move on to the next color and sort of show you where I'm going. So now that we've dry brushed the feathers all in, or the black feathers all in that Ulthuan Grey, we're going to now dry brush the cloak using Fenrisian Grey. This has a little bit more of a cool tone to it. It's got that hue of blue in there. And I really like that because, again, I went with the blue cloak because of that midnight vibe, but I wanted to sort of give it this weathered, highlighted feel to, again, have that sort of moonlit look go, but still have that blue tone show up. So the Fenrisian Grey worked really well for this. And honestly, the cloak is probably my favorite thing of this entire mini that I painted. It just came out really well, and I really like the sort of dusty look that I've got on it. It's just very nice. I think it's time to shade the metallics. So for that, instead of using a normal shade like I would traditionally do, which would honestly probably be Nuln Oil, I wanted to try something a bit different that I'd seen Games Workshop actually do in some of their painting tutorials. They often use Basilicanum Grey contrast paint as a shade over top Leadbelcher or other gray metallics, and I really like the look of it, but I've never actually tried it myself, so I thought this was a perfect opportunity for it, and honestly, I do. I really like the way that it looks. I definitely think I'm going to be doing some testing because I've done a few instances where I have dry brushed a metallic over top Basilicanum Grey versus doing it this way, and I want to see which one I prefer because I actually do like both, but I want to know which is like easier and quicker for me and kind of stick with that because I do like this effect. We are on to the one and only cleanup stage for this miniature, which was honestly part of my intention with it. I really wanted to go through this mini and have to go back and touch things up as little as possible, and I think I actually accomplished this. This is, like I said, the one cleanup stage I do, so I grabbed some Greyseer, basically just touch up the skeletons, like the bird heads, on his outfit and everything, and then the one that's obviously covering his face because I got a little bit of paint here and there, but other than that, it's a pretty simple cleanup stage. And because that cleanup stage is done and Skeleton Horde just works really well as a bone color, I went ahead and just applied that to all of the bones. I think I did 2 layers because I actually tend to like to go for a slightly darker hue. I don't know, I just really like it. One day I'll do a single layer of Skeleton Horde and actually see what like the pale, more transparent, I guess. I don't know. I just don't know if I like it, but I do the 2 layers for the Skeleton Horde and make sure to hit all of the bones. And then we're gonna go ahead and move on straight after that to some Reikland Fleshshade, because honestly, it just works really well as a complement to Skeleton Horde. It adds a little bit more of that warmth that I was wanting to pull in with just those colors back into the miniature, and I just also put this on his flesh tone to help smooth his skin out a little bit, because occasionally the flesh tones can be a little splotchy sometimes, or at least when I paint them. I don't think I always move it around enough or let it pool sometimes in weird places. So to help smooth and blend that, Reikland Fleshshade just works super well for it. I also add it to the wood portion of his shoes as well, just to add a little bit of depth there, because I don't want to dry brush them, but I do want to emphasize them a little bit more. So it's just a nice little touch. While the bird boy himself is drying, I think it's time now to go ahead and put some Astrogranite onto his base. I chose this primarily because, one, Astrogranite works really well if you decide to add a colored shade over top of it, or contrast paint will work as well, but I've mostly used shades over top of it. And I wasn't 100% sure what I was doing with the base at this point. So I went with Astrogranite because even if I kept it neutral gray, which was kind of where I was leaning, I could add a color if I wanted and still have it look great. While the Astrogranite is drying, and we want to make sure that that is definitely dry before we do anything else to it, whether it's just putting a shade on it or dry brushing, maybe we'll do that. But while we're waiting, we're going to go ahead and do our touch-ups of the Leviadon Blue onto the straps that are holding the skull bones to his outfit. So we'll go ahead and take a tiny brush and just delicately line those little threads there. My metallics were looking a little, not dull, but just muted, and so I decided to go back over them with a quick dry brush of Necron Compound. It's time to wrap this boy up and go ahead and finish off that base, because otherwise my bird is done, and I'm very pleased with him. So for the base, I decided ultimately to actually stick with a neutral gray color tone. I thought about maybe putting Drakenhof blue shade over top of it just to really go with that midnight look, but ultimately decided against it because I honestly feel like I'm going to end up using this miniature more in D&D than I may necessarily in Warcry, because I just don't play a lot of Warcry. And he really feels like just a very cool, like either NPC character that you end up fighting, or a player character that I might use eventually down the line. And so I went with a just gray background because he looks like he's kind of like dancing to me. And I just wanted to give him as much space, so we just kept it neutral, kept with that color palette, and just went with it, and I think it works really well. The last two things that we're gonna do to it though, because the shade is dry at this point, and it's time to add two final colors. We're gonna dry brush it first, a little bit more heavily using Fenrisian Grey to pull that color back into our color palette, add a little bit of blue into that gray tone. And then once that's done, we're gonna go and with a slightly lighter dry brush, I'm gonna go back over top of it and using Longbeard Grey, do a light dusting, which just kind of pulls that whitish tone, and again, it brings that moonlight color back out. And with that, our boy is finished, so let's go ahead and take a look at him. And here he is. I am actually incredibly pleased with how this mini came out, which I know I say at the end of a lot of my videos, but honestly, like, I had a concept in mind for this one going into it a little bit more solidly than sometimes I do, which is weird, honestly, considering how much I paint and I'm doing it for film and everything. But regardless, I had a concept for this one, and I feel like I executed it exactly how I wanted to, with really like almost no adjustments. I did one minor adjustment to what I was doing for a dry brush at one point, but beyond that, like the look that I was going for, I nailed it. And I'm super happy, and I can't wait to paint the rest of these guys because I want to have a whole troop of these like midnight bird boys who will just destroy both people in Warcry and also people in D&D, because I really feel like I want to use them in a D&D campaign. I don't know, they just feel very in theme. I play a lot of Raven Queen like characters, so that might be partially why. I don't even like birds that much, but I really like feathers. And so this guy just really appealed to me. So I hope you guys have enjoyed watching me paint this guy. I hope it gave you some inspiration for some things that you can do later on down the line. And I will see you guys next time. Make sure to check back next week for another news video, as well as another hobby video, hopefully another painting video, but who knows, there could be unboxings and all sorts of things coming down the line, because maybe we'll get some cool new toys soon. But I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. I have been Angela, you've been watching Hobby Night. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the video, and I'll see you next time. Bye guys!